Hello, welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is from the South. Thousands of people in the Dominican Republic took to the streets in Santo Domingo to protest against the Electoral Authority. On Saturday night, they reached the headquarters of the Central Electoral Board with posters demanding respect for democracy. Last Sunday, Dominicans were scheduled to vote in municipal elections, but they were suspended due to voting irregularities. And citizens who stayed at home organized a protest by banging pots and pans. They demanded transparency and clean elections. Soldiers in Haiti have shot at police officers who have been protesting for days, demanding improved conditions of service and the right to form labor unions. On Sunday, the protesting officers, accompanied by civilian supporters, attempted to march to the presidential palace to seek an audience with President Jovenel Moïse. The march was, however, brought to a sudden halt after soldiers guarding the palace opened fire at the procession. Now to the U.S., where Senator for Vermont Bernie Sanders has registered a decisive victory in Nevada's Democratic Presidential Caucus. Sanders polled 44.7%, beating his closest rival the former Vice President Joe Biden, who scored 19.5%. South Bend, Indiana's former mayor Pete Buttigieg, who came out second in the New Hampshire primaries, stood at 15.6%. The win tightens Sanders' grip on the race, which moves to South Carolina next weekend.
Let me thank the people of Nevada for their support. In Nevada, we have just put together a multi-generational, multi-racial coalition, which is going to not only win in Nevada, it's going to sweep this country.
Several organizations have spoken on the recent decision by the Electoral Authority in Bolivia to bar Evo Morales from running for a seat in the Senate. The Bolivarian Alliance of the Peoples of Our America said in a statement, this was a clear political retaliation and an attack on freedom of Bolivians to choose its candidates. It also rejects the continued coup against Morales and calls on the international community to denounce it. Still in Bolivia, a state of emergency has been declared in the Tiquipaya municipality due to heavy rains and mudslides. The Taquiña River overflowed and affected 800 families. Authorities say there are still several people that have not yet been evacuated. Meanwhile, rains are expected to continue in this area. To other news, Israeli security forces have killed one Palestinian youth and injured two others in the besieged Gaza Strip. Palestine health officials confirmed that two other men were hit by gunfire on Sunday while trying to retrieve the body of a man who had been shot dead by Israeli soldiers near the separation wall. A statement by the Israeli Defense Ministry claimed that the 26-year-old man was shot dead while attempting to plant explosives on the border fence. On Saturday, hundreds of people gathered outside the Australian embassy in London to protest against the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The protesters, who later marched on to Parliament Square, are also demanding for his immediate release from detention. His father, John Shipton, the former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis, and Pink Floyd star Roger Waters were among the people who turned out for the protest. The full extradition hearing for Assange, who has been held in Belmarsh prison in southeast London since last September, is set to start on Monday.
With gratitude, it's very grateful to see such tremendous support, such strong support, so many people taking up the noble task of bringing freedom to Julian Assange. It's very important.
Let's turn to our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, who has more on Assange's case.
Hundreds of people hit the streets of London today to demand that the UK government does not allow Julian Assange to be extradited to the US. As we know, Julian Assange was arrested in April from the Ecuadorian embassy, where he had been given the status of political asylum. This was withdrawn by the Lenin Moreno after it was given by the Rafael Correa government. And since then, he's been in Belmarsh, the high security prison in the south of London. Now on Monday, British courts will examine his extradition request, where in the US he's been indicted on 18 charges, 17 related to espionage, and faces up to 175 years in jail for releasing US government documents specifically related to Afghanistan and the US, alongside Chelsea Manning, who is also currently in the US prison. So various personalities went to today's march, people from the music sphere, from the fashion sphere. Julian's own father, John Shipton, who's in the UK at the moment, working towards getting Julian released. And increasingly, there's been increasing support amongst politicians. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, has recently come out in favour of Assange, as has the Shadow Chancellor John MacDonald. And so on Monday, this 5 days of hearing will determine, or go towards determining, whether Julian Assange will be extradited to the US. And today, Londoners came out in their hundreds to demand that he is not extradited to the US.
That was Pablo Navarrete from London. Social movements in Colombia have joined teachers who are continuing their strike against the humanitarian crisis in the country. More in this report.
Teachers, social movements and unions have joined the strike on the streets of Colombia to reject the murder of social leaders.
Here in Colombia, we're going through a terrible humanitarian crisis this year. Only in 2020, 51 social leaders have been killed. That is worse than in the time of the dictatorship in Latin America.
Those in the strike are also rejecting the neoliberal reforms by President Ivan Duque, labor and pension reforms that seek to worsen the economic situation of workers in the country, measures implemented at the behest of the International Monetary Fund.
The government starting the legislative year on March 16th has planned a radical reform to the pension and justice system, a project to control social protests. The political class wants to impose through Congress a neoliberal reform, and that's why we are making this strike stronger.
The strike in Bogota reached the emblematic Bolivar Square and then spread to the rest of the country. It wants to rejuvenate the social struggle on the streets and demand that President Duque does not turn his back on the people and their reality. The people want him to listen to the demand.
We will continue with the strike. We will march until the government begins a negotiation with the National Strike Committee.
Meanwhile, social movements are demanding respect for their lives. Youth leader Yuri Ortiz was murdered in the municipality of Segovia, Department of Antioquia, and former FARC combatant Winston Moreno was also killed in the Department of Choco. They have since called for another national strike on the 25th of March.
Coming up, the political message behind Brazil's famous carnival samba schools. Thank you for joining us again. Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega has sworn in General Julio César Avilés for another 5-year term as head of the country's military. Speaking during the swearing ceremony held in the capital, Managua, President Ortega hailed the role the military continues to play in defending the country's independence and sovereignty. On his part, Avilés pledged the military's continued support and loyalty in defending the foundations and principles of the Sandinista revolution.
Peace must be defended continuously. It must be renewed constantly. And here we have an army for peace. Long live the army of Nicaragua.
We will continue to be highly connected, loyal, truthful, while defending the principles of independence, sovereignty and national self-determination, which are unwaverable rights of our people and foundations of the Nicaraguan nation.
And now for the next part of our series, Failure of an Invasion. On February 23rd, it seemed an invasion of Venezuela had begun with the excuse of bringing humanitarian aid. The attacks were directed at the armed forces in an attempt to break their unity. Madeleine Garcia reports.
The attack seemed imminent. The United States and its allies were preparing the invasion for February 23rd, with the use of so-called humanitarian aid.
They do the same thing everywhere. The US uses humanitarian aid to appear as the good guy. And even when there really is humanitarian aid, they use it to bring in weapons as well.
The aid organized by the US government has a strong political connotation. And the United Nations, the Red Cross, or Caritas cannot take part in a political action, which uses humanitarian aid.
Top U.S. officials, from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to the head of the U.S. Southern Command, joined in.
You will ultimately be held accountable for your actions. The President has been quite clear, and our job as military professionals is to be ready.
The response to such threats was stronger than ever.
Look here, Yankee, you won't intervene in my country. Come here and you'll get a beating. We will be your Latin American Vietnam. Never traitors, always loyal.
The Venezuelan military also began to prepare to defend peace in the country.
The Bolivarian armed forces are not afraid. We are deeply patriotic, and the strongest weapon for a soldier or a civilian is their patriotism.
Patriotism was not the message the US and its allies were hoping to get across, but the Venezuelan armed forces showed they were not for breaking.
My Commander-in-Chief, allow me to present you with the first rifle fired by a member of the militia, trained under the revolution. It is a token of civilian military unity.
In Venezuela, we want peace. We have the right to peace, to develop our country. And we do not interfere with others. We are peaceful people, but nobody should interfere with us. Donald Trump, take your hands off Venezuela and cut the threats.
Hijos e hijas, hermanos y hermanas,
sons and daughters, brothers and sisters of our armed forces. Now is the time to resist, to struggle, and to keep going forward. This is no time to relax or to doubt. No, it is a time of dignity and patriotism.
For Venezuela's revolutionaries, it was indeed the time for resistance and struggle. But for the extremist opposition, it was time for war and death.
Either the aid comes in or it comes in.
There will certainly be an intervention in Venezuela. All those who oppose humanitarian aid will be considered the enemy. There will be an act of war. So they will have to confront the multinational forces who will enter Venezuela. They have until the humanitarian aid arrives, and that will be led by an army from Brazil and Colombia, with of course a contingent from the United States. But there's no need to be worried, because this does not mean war, only that they will neutralize all those who try to stop the humanitarian aid from arriving.
In Venezuela,
something strange has been happening for the last few years, because it is Venezuelans who go off and ask for us to be invaded or for them to seize our economic assets, as happened with Citco.
I want to make it clear that if anyone had the least idea that any leader of our armed forces, myself included, was going to lose heart or break ranks in the face of all these circumstances, they were sorely mistaken. I think that was part of their attempt to trick people, and that is why they failed.
They failed totally. They ran into a brick wall of a united army. Their big gamble was that the armed forces will split on such a scale that it will be possible to overthrow President Maduro and for Juan Guaidó to have his own armed forces, but that never happened.
It didn't happen, because in this moment of maximum aggression by the United States, the unity between the people and the armed forces held firm, and its most lethal weapon, the Bolivarian militia and the country's new doctrine of defense, is what we'll be looking at in our next episode.
Madeline Garcia, Telesur, Caracas, Venezuela. And now we turn to Carnival. In Brazil, tens of thousands of revelers are out on the streets of Rio de Janeiro, taking part in the world-famous Rio Carnival. Vying for the title of Carnival Champions, the city's 13 top samba schools will have 1 hour each to wow the spectators and judges with elaborate shows, colorful dancers and drummers. This year, Carnival is also being used to take a stand against intolerance and oppression of minorities by the government of President Jair Bolsonaro. Reigning champions Mangueira are staging a parade that will tell the story of Jesus being born in a favela, who stands up to the prophets of intolerance.
This matter of religious intolerance, I personally prefer to say that it is religious racism. It's not only intolerance, it is more than that, because it is prejudice against the African Brazilian cultures. Today is very intense thing, mostly because there was significant progress of neo-Pentecostal religions, Christian fundamentals, and some of them, not all. We can't put everything in the same basket, but some have a really hostile speech.
But it's not all happiness in Carnival in Rio. On Saturday night, security forces in the city of Porto Alegre attacked Carnival revelers for allegedly not observing requirements to end all activities by 9 p.m. Several members of the public sustained minor injuries in this chaos after military police officers started firing rubber bullets and tear gas canisters into the crowd. Our correspondent Brian Mir from Ouro Preto tells us what concerns Brazilians most these days.
For hundreds of years, Brazil's street carnival has been a moment in which people from the working class and the poor can express their dissent with the government, with the bourgeoisie, and the status quo. And here in the city of Ouro Preto is no different. This city was founded in the 1600s, and it's had a big street carnival for over 200 years. There's some drum groups here that were founded in the 1800s, so they're still playing the same rhythms on the street. And like everywhere across Brazil, the carnival goers are wearing costumes, criticizing the government, and breaking out in spontaneous chants against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Carnival's going on for another couple of days, but across the country, this is turning out to be one of the most politicized carnivals in Brazilian history, as more and more people are rising up against the resurgence of neo-fascism.
That was Brian Mir from Brazil. And dozens of people have protested in the South African city of Cape Town against what they're calling the government's anti-poor policies. The protesters, calling themselves the Excluded, are drawn from various social organizations representing women, youth, homeless people, and informal settlement residents. The protests comes a day before Finance Minister Tito Mboweni unveils the country's 2020 national budget, which is expected to unleash austerity measures that trade unions have described as a savage attack on the working class. After this break, a major earthquake hits the border of Turkey and Iran. Join us again after this. Thank you for joining us again. The death toll in China from the COVID-19 epidemic rose past 2,400 on Sunday, after 96 more people died in Hubei province, the hard-hit epicenter of the outbreak. According to the National Health Commission, the majority of deaths occurred in the city of Wuhan, where the virus first emerged in December. The total number of confirmed cases currently stands at 76,936. Meanwhile, Italian authorities are racing to contain the biggest outbreak of coronavirus in Europe sealing off the worst affected towns and banning public events after a third patient died of the illness. The Civil Protection Unit said the number of cases of the virus totaled 152. Almost a dozen towns in Lombardy and Veneto regions have been placed under quarantine, with locals urged to stay home and special permission needed to enter or leave the designated areas.
152 in total, of which 3 are deceased. The victim of Cremona, to which we added 2 victims from last week, and the healed men whom we know about.
At least 9 people were killed and 50 others injured after an earthquake struck the Turkey-Iran border region. According to authorities, the magnitude 5.7 earthquake, which centered on the Iranian city of Khoi, affected villages in the province of Van. Rescue workers have been deployed to the Iran-Turkey border region, which is prone to powerful earthquakes. Last month, more than 40 people were killed by an earthquake that struck the same region.
Unfortunately, we have lost 9 of our citizens in this morning's disaster. 50 of our citizens were injured. 2 people from the injured that are being treated at the 3 hospitals in the region are in intensive care. Meaning, I can say that we have 2 citizens in a critical condition. In this context, those of our patients that needed surgery received the necessary intervention. I want to say that the other injured are in good condition, and they are not under life-threatening situation.
Algerians have rallied in the capital Algiers to mark the first anniversary of the protest movement that ousted longtime leader Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Police used water cannons to disperse demonstrators as they tried to march towards the presidential palace. The protesters vowed to continue protesting until all leaders associated with the previous government stepped down. Mass protests first broke out on February 22, 2018, after Bouteflika announced his intentions to run for a 5th term. An intervention by the army forced him to step down 6 weeks after the protests started.
We are not coming out to celebrate the first anniversary of the Hirak so long as there are still political prisoners. We are not coming out to celebrate the first anniversary of the Hirak so long as justice isn't yet free. We are not coming out to celebrate the first anniversary of the Hirak so long as police continue to crack down on the people. We are not coming out to celebrate the first anniversary of the Hirak so long as the media still spread disinformation. We are not coming out to celebrate the first anniversary of the Hirak so long as we don't have the rule of law.
And those protests in Algeria started in 2019, not 2018. Let's continue. Counting is underway in Togo's presidential elections amid claims of voting irregularities. Some 2 million voters flocked to more than 9,000 polling stations across the country to vote in an election widely expected to see President Faure Gnassingbé win a 4th term. Meanwhile, on Saturday evening, opposition candidate Agbeyome Kodjo told journalists that he was denouncing alleged voting irregularities. He claimed that in some parts of the country, ruling party supporters were allowed to vote twice at illegal polling stations. Thousands of Moroccans have marched in the city of Casablanca to denounce social inequalities and demand the release of political detainees. The crowds protested peacefully against the high cost of living, poor public services and economic policies, which they say are responsible for the deterioration of the local currency's purchasing power. The demonstration was organized by the Moroccan Social Front, a collective of 4 leftist parties and labor unions.
The Social Front is a result of 3 years of thought on behalf of democratic left-wing militants and their will to create a social force that will be able to face the savage neoliberal policies that we see today and have fallen upon the Moroccan people's day-to-day lives.
And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.